Hi, my name is Ian Bame. We're at Players and Plays, and we here at the Revolution School are involving our community to imagine what school could be. So part of our mission in Revolution is to involve our community in imagining what school could be. So I have 3 questions. You can answer one, you can answer multiple, whatever feels best. The first is, can you tell us about your most memorable learning experience? The second is, can you tell us about your most memorable teacher? And the third is, what could school be? Again, none of these have to be in the classroom. They can be outside, they can be with an extracurricular, really whatever you feel most matches.
So if I think all the way back to when I was in primary school, the elementary school that I went to was one of the first schools to introduce the open classroom concept. And in open classroom, you move through the space and you progress at your own rate. So there are lots of things that you do independently, as well as things you do with a teacher, as well as things you do with small groups of students. And that was completely different than what I'd done before that experience. And I never really, in junior high or high school, I never had another educational experience that was anything like that, where you really kind of went through the program based on at your own pace and based on as quickly as you were mastering concepts.
My most memorable learning experience. At times where I may have had struggles in a particular subject in math. You know, I hated math. I was more of a humanities guy. So
Me too.
Being frustrated with algebra 2 and calculus, that was memorable because I had to figure out how to overcome it.
I think most of my learning that I did was at home, truthfully. I was the oldest of 9, and I had a lot of responsibilities at an early age, and so most of the learning that I did that I valued the most was through my parents.
I didn't have an excellent background in high school in writing, and that was his specialty, was writing. And I had never gotten anything below a B ever. And he gave me a C, and he said, "Let's talk." And he talked to me, and encouraged me, and by the end of a semester, I was getting A's on my papers.
Right.
So I would say that was one of my most outstanding learnings. Yeah.
I have kind of a mixed background, but I went to school in Europe for a while. So my elementary school was actually in Europe, so I went to a very strict private school. And when I came over here, I went to a private school again. And then I went to an alternative school. And unfortunately, the school is no longer here, but I have a 15-year-old son. And so I've had an opportunity to see the public school system. And I kind of feel that some of the things that I had when I was a kid in terms of developing other areas other than math and science and stuff like that, there's not enough of that going on right now.
Yeah.
So I visited a couple schools last year, the Friends School and Penn Charter. Again, I think they're very focused on education, but they also do branch out and try to develop some of the artistic and other interests that students may have.
Yeah.
And since my son goes to public school, I'm hoping that they change a little bit, start to teach kids some important things.
Yeah. What was your most memorable teacher in or out of the classroom?
My most memorable teacher would have to have been a coach, actually. My college coach, Bruiser Flint, at Drexel University, taught us that the pressure was on us to prepare. The pressure was not on us to perform. That if we prepared at a high level, then we would be able to perform at a high level. So that was a lesson that I never forgot.
Yeah.
I think most memorable teacher for me was a person who, lots of teaching modalities. It wasn't just teacher directed. It was an engaging class. There were opportunities to ask questions and to sometimes go off on tangents if that was the direction that the questioning was going in. It was probably more progressive than traditional in terms of students having ownership in what was happening. So I think I can still see her. So.
Great.
My most influential teacher was a teacher I had when I was doing my master's work in theater. And he was the scenic director, costume director, and he was very influential. He was also my mentor.
Yeah.
My most influential teacher was probably Miss Loon. So she was my music teacher, and she was just a very nice lady. I wasn't much of a musician, but she was just very encouraging all the time.
Never had one.
Never had one.
No, I had horrible school experience. Never had any teacher that I really.
And finally, in your opinion, what could school be?
I think school can be a place that's exciting and a place that kids get up and they're really, really energized to be a part of it. I think what we're doing at Revolution represents something that's really courageous. We're the Revolution School, but I think part of what is really awesome about what we're doing is we're courageous enough to give kids an opportunity to take a really deep, meaningful dive into their education.
What could it be? It could be an opportunity to learn what there is to learn and to have the encouragement to learn what you're interested in.
Well, I think that school needs to prepare kids for life, for real life. And we're facing a lot of challenges these days. It's very competitive, but we're facing a lot of things that kids need to prepare for. And I think that, you can't do a one-size-fits-all for kids. You have to find out what kids' strengths are. And, maybe it's not math, maybe it's not being in, necessarily the corporate world, but try to figure out what a kid's strengths are so then they can tailor the education more to those.
School could be everything. I mean, it could be so much to a lot of kids if they were given the opportunity to focus on the things that they were interested in, and not put in this box. That's how I felt going to school. I felt like I was in this box that I was supposed to, be able to answer questions the same time as all the other kids did, and read when all the other kids read, and everybody's not the same. And so I think it's important to take that in consideration, that we're all different learners with different learning styles, and they need to be addressed. And they're getting better in the public school, but they still have a long way to go as far as addressing learning styles. So I think that school could be a wonderful thing for not only community and getting kids to learn how to communicate with each other, live with each other, love each other, the whole thing. But it's still too much in a box, I think. Yeah.
Good evening. Welcome to the beautiful Plays and Players Theater. My name is Tom McManus. I'm the head of mission at Revolution School. And I'd like to welcome you to our conversation tonight between Lydia Han and Ted Dintersmith, What School Could Be. A little bit about Revolution School. We're an innovative, progressive high school opening in September of 2019. We envision a different landscape for education in Philadelphia, one where students and teachers are inspired by each other, the world, and what truly matters. Revolution School was just profiled in the most recent issue of Philadelphia Magazine. Anyone pick it up? Has a cheesesteaks on the cover? We're after the cheesesteaks. We'll take it. We're in go mode right now, meaning that we are accepting applications, and we're building our first class, small class of pioneering students. And we will all happily talk to you about any of that after this little show here. We have our stickers. Feel free to grab any one of us. But that's not why we're here tonight. Tonight's program is an expression of our school mission, which is breaking down the walls between learning and life. We believe that schools cannot exist in isolation, and that a school that believes in educating for the future must invite its community into the conversation, while also sharing and creating knowledge that benefits everyone. The specific event tonight is a realization of a vision that the Revolution School team had well over a year ago, to bring together members of the Philadelphia community for engaging discussion focused on learning and growth. So we selected Plays and Players as our living room tonight. Please join me in thanking Linda Grin and Mike Conley and our technician, Kyle, in the back, for making us at home here at Plays and Players. Also, a big thanks to PhillyCam, terrific organization, which helped our youth do some pre-interviews. How many of you participated in a pre-interview of some kind? Okay, great. And they're going to be involved in taping the whole event tonight so that we'll be able to share it with others. The conversation you're about to hear is the last stop in Ted Dintersmith's busy day. Ted began at 8:30 a.m. at the workshop school in West Philadelphia. Then he met with, then he met with students and leaders at Philadelphia Youth Network. And he finished his school day at Science Leadership Academy High School in Center City. These are three excellent examples of the kind of innovative education that can happen when we break down the walls between schools and their communities. We could have visited many more, but we're so grateful to the partners that we met with today to make Ted's visit meaningful. So another round of applause for those folks. Finally, just before coming here, we gathered with a group of 40 leaders, influencers, and students from around the city of Philadelphia, and we gathered on the campus of the Philadelphia School at 25th and Lombard. Yeah, someone wants to clap for that. That conversation, facilitated by middle school students, included representatives from public, private, and charter schools, civic organizations, and locally based nonprofit and for-profit businesses, and of course, the students themselves. We lowered many walls, and we brought diverse voices into contact with one another. We hope will be the first of many conversations like this, that Revolution, and in partnership perhaps with our friends who helped us tonight, Ed Camp Foundation. Give them a round of applause. We hope to host more of these conversations and keep that breaking down the walls alive. Why did we exhaust our guest Ted Dintersmith in this way? We wanted to show Ted what excellence looks like here in Philadelphia education. There's so much to be optimistic about for our children. Even more valuable are the connections made between those of us who live and work in close proximity to one another each and every day. Each child, whatever neighborhood or part of the city or whatever kind of school they attend, belongs to all of us. And we all can be part of the answer to helping them. Every student's voice matters, and so do all of yours. An event like this doesn't happen without lots of help, so I want to thank our awesome Revolution team, Megan Covington, Jenna Croxford, Henry Fairfax, Lydia Han, Noelle Kellick, and Jane Shore, who was particularly instrumental throughout our planning. Also, a very special thank you to our fiscal sponsor for Revolution School in this year that we are visioning, and we're doing our community outreach, and that's the Urban Affairs Coalition. And finally, our deep gratitude to the Revolution School Board of Trustees, many of whom are with us tonight, and with particular acclamation for our founder and board chair, Gina Moore, whose tireless vision, her tireless vision and support make our work joyful and meaningful. And now to the conversation. The first person I have to introduce you to is probably your neighbor. Like you, she walked past homes, schools, civic institutions, and businesses that define our shared city life. Lydia Han knows our neighborhood because she's one of our own. Lydia has been an advocate and voice for Philadelphians for over 16 years. She is 6ABC's consumer investigative reporter, troubleshooter, and co-anchor of Action News Sunday mornings. She is also the creator of the documentary series, #ThisIsAmerica, which prompts all of us to get to know each other's unique American stories, check our own biases, and act as positive agents of change and unity in our communities. This has never been more important. An Emmy Award winner on camera, off camera, she is equally invested in Philadelphia and issues affecting our civic life. She is on the Community Advisory Board for the Asian American Women's Coalition and volunteers her time for a number of other organizations. She's especially passionate about raising awareness and desperately needed funds for lung cancer research after the passing of her mother in 2009. Lydia also mentors aspiring journalists, and I know all of the educators in this room have a few candidates that we can send her way. Lydia describes herself as a mom to 2 young children, a wife and a friend who enjoys good food, good wine, and most of all, a good laugh. Her own schooling included journalism with an international focus at Northwestern, and also bilingual study at Yonsei University in Seoul, Korea. Her personal interests in education, consumer awareness, and technology make her the perfect partner for an intimate conversation in our small living room here tonight. Welcome, Lydia Han. lost my favorite. And now Ted. Given his film production credits, I like to imagine that my hero, Ted Dintersmith, had a do the right thing, Matrix red pill or blue pill, Wizard of Oz curtain moment, where he got woke to the machinery of education and was whisked away on an adventure. He will surely share a moment or two that sounds something like that in the conversation today. But I suspect, like all of our learning, it was actually an iterative and grounded in authentic experience sort of process. Ted has his own school experiences, of course, which included earning a PhD in engineering from Stanford University and a BA from the College of William and Mary with high honors in physics and English. An accomplished venture capital investor for 2 decades, he also ran a business at Analog Devices that helped enable the digital revolution. With a gift for storytelling and a pull to advocacy, he has worked as a staff analyst at the U.S. House of Representatives and represented the U.S. at the United Nations General Assembly. Ted has become one of America's leading advocates for educational policies that foster creativity, innovation, motivation, and purpose. This began as he produced and funded award-winning educational documentaries. For educational and community leaders alike across the country, viewings of Most Likely to Succeed have helped them jumpstart real change. I first met Ted while I was working in Hawaii, and he went to all 50 states to meet with governors, legislators, educators, parents, and students to encourage communities to work collectively to reimagine school and its purpose. Ted's interest in our collective work in the Hawaiian Islands has been a source of pride and energy for many, not least of with myself. In fact, I credit Ted for being part of my inspiration to return home to Philadelphia and engage in the work here. What Ted learned about the conditions required to let our students, teachers, and schools race forward became the basis for his 2018 best-selling book, What School Could Be. I've been honored by his friendship and continually inspired by his dedication to this work and optimism for what schools will be. We are listening, Ted. We're incredibly privileged to have Ted in our living room tonight. He's been on the road since early September, handing out the perspective-changing red pills, and when necessary, pulling back the wizard's curtain to get us all to talk about what truly matters. Much in demand and always entertaining, please join me in welcoming our friend, Ted Dintersmith.
Thank you.
It's all downhill from here.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much to the Revolution School for having us, Ted. I am so delighted to talk to you tonight. I recognize that education is a community commitment and a community responsibility, and this conversation is critical for the collective. But I have to tell you, on a very personal level, it resonates with us at home. We have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old just embarking on their educational journey, so I can't wait to talk to you tonight.
Great. And they're in the right years to talk about this, so it's perfect.
So I don't know if you can see out in the audience, but I am curious who's here so we know to whom we're speaking. So how many of you are teachers? Can you raise your hands? Okay. And how many of you are school administrators or somehow connected to the education world? And how many of you are parents? And just concerned citizens? Very good. So, Ted, my first question is for your benefit. I know the year that you wrote the book, you spent 245 nights in hotel rooms. The book is complete, but your work is not, so you have not been home since September 6th. Do you know where you are tonight?
A pretty good guess. But I got here last night, so I had a chance to walk around, yeah.
Well, welcome to Philadelphia,
Yeah, it's
the
great to
city
be
of
here.
brotherly love. You know, we're home to the reigning Super Bowl champions. Good people with grit and so much more, right?
I was actually rooting for them against the Patriots. I lived in Boston for years, but I was rooting for your guys.
Well, Ted, we like you even more now, so thank you. That's a good way to start the conversation. So
I have to tell you, you know where you have the biggest fans for the Eagles? North Dakota.
Oh,
I,
and
I
how do
go
you know
there
that?
a lot, and Carson Wentz. Everywhere you go in North Dakota on Sundays, they're watching the Eagles game. So
That makes sense.
yeah, it's great.
So how did a venture capitalist become an activist in education reform? What sparked your interest and the subsequent investigation?
Yeah, there's probably a couple things that kind of collide. I mean, the first is we backed all these tech companies, and for a long time I thought that the innovation was an unambiguous good. You know, they were making us all more productive and entertaining us, making communication so much easier. And over time, I began to become concerned that a lot of these innovations were actually replacing people in jobs, marginalizing people, complicating what's required to be a citizen. And the thing that's, I think, notable is that the pace of advance in innovation is not like tapering off, or it's not steady as she goes. It's exponential. And what that means is that, you know, the amount of change and disruption we'll see in the next 10 years is going to be dramatically more than we've seen in the last 10. Well, you know, 10 years ago it was when the smartphone came out. And so when you think it's not going to be modestly more, but dramatically more, that has huge implications for what happens in school.
And these are not just minimum wage routine jobs. You're talking about doctors, dare I say journalists, all kinds of jobs. Can you paint us a picture of what our future looks like 10 years from now?
Well, I think just visually, anything that's routine will be gone. I mean, that will be done by some form of automated solutions. And I use the term machine intelligence, you know, so robotics, artificial intelligence, software, basic computer hardware and software. And so if it's routine, it'll be gone. If there are a lot of people doing it today, it will be done in an automated way. And, you know, the pace is just really, I want to keep emphasizing that. So we did this film and we showed Deep Blue beating the world's best chess player. We then showed Watson beating the world's best Jeopardy player. But since then, you know, artificial intelligence beat the world's best Go player, which is a very complicated, nuanced, strategic game. All these things are things at one point a bunch of experts said would never happen. You know, so that'll happen. Is that bad news? I don't know that it's clearly bad or good news. It's news. And I think if we train ourselves, and this is not just kids in K through 12, not just college, but I think agile programs to retrain people in existing jobs, it can make people a lot more productive. What concerns me, gets to the other half of the equation, is most schools I visit, if somebody is excellent at memorizing material, replicating low-level procedures, and following instructions, that kid will be on the honor roll. That is almost certainly going to put a kid at the top of their class in K through 12 and in most colleges. And that's exactly what machine intelligence does perfectly and instantly. And so I think the question is, how do we get around that? What do you do? Because if you come out of school and you just follow that chain. If you drop out of high school, bad news. High school graduate only today, bad news. Drop out of college, often with debt, bad news. But even the kids graduating from college, the majority, 70%, have substantial amounts of student loan debt, and about half get any kind of a job you associate with a higher degree. And so there are problems all along the way.
So with this disruption and our rapidly evolving world in mind, you decided to take a trip, a very ambitious trip. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, we did this film. How many, I'm just curious, have any of you seen Most Likely to Succeed? So the film came out, and if you loved it, give all the credit. The director is a guy named Greg Whiteley. And I just love this guy. He did an amazing job on that film. So if you loved it, he gets the credit. Anything you didn't like, you can blame me. But I traveled a lot with that film. And a lot of people said to me, interesting, but we went out of our way. We showed a couple students working on these interesting, challenging projects and just saw what happens when kids can't wait to get to school every day, when teachers are trusted, which, I'm a huge fan. Anybody who reads my book can see it's clear. I love our teaching force. They are far more innovative than we ever give them credit, but we have taken so much of the trust out of that. And we don't trust them as professionals, which is, shame on everybody else for that. But traveling with the film, we said, this is what they do, but you shouldn't copy them. It should be something that you do that works for you and your family and your community and your kids and your teachers. And the second thing people said was they'd see the film and they'd say, oh, we could never do that. That's beyond what we could do. And I began to, in these discussions, to get this sense of the really interesting and I think very difficult problem in education is, how does an existing school change? You know, it's one thing to start a new school. I mean, the Revolution School would be phenomenal, but how do you change an existing school? So I just decided to actually, I'll come back to, you know, you'll think I've got this thing about North Dakota. I'd never been to North Dakota. This is a true story. I'd never been to North Dakota, and somebody connected me with a guy in Fargo who was doing this kind of like incubator for startups. And said, we had a mutual friend, and he said, Ted might be willing to talk to you. So I talked to him for a while, and turns out he's also the TEDx Fargo organizer. And in the middle of the phone conversation, well, he's talking, he said, well, what are you interested in? I'm talking kind of about this stuff. And then in the middle of the conversation, he says, oh my gosh, I just got a cancellation for next week's TEDx Fargo. Can you come and give a talk? And I said, sure, you know, and so I did that, but I'd never been to Fargo, and I thought, well, it'll be really interesting to go someplace like that. And on the trip out, I said, well, if I'm going to why don't I do this justice? And I just had the idea on the trip out to just commit to going to all 50 states. And then in the talk, I said, I'm going to do this, and who the heck knows what I'll learn, but it's got to be fascinating, and it was.
So you went to all 50 states, public, private, and charter schools, right?
Yeah, I visited 200 schools, all types.
And all kinds of cities and towns, rural,
Yeah, I mean,
metropolitan.
if you look at any way you divide the United States, you know, by geography, by ethnicity, by income level, by anything, I was sort of like relatively on target. And I spent about a third of my time in rural schools, which get very little attention in American education discussion. I spent a lot in urban, spent some in suburban. You know, it's like, try to just do it. And I was lucky because, you know, I had a great group that helped me plan it. And, you know, so that I could never have planned it on my own.
It's a pretty interesting story. Can you talk about that group?
Yeah, so I mentioned Greg Whiteley. So I was an Obama guy from the very beginning. And back, I'll avoid the political comments tonight. So I was an Obama guy. And Greg did the film for me, but Greg did the documentary on Mitt Romney called Mitt. And so I called Greg when I decided that. I said, hey, I got this idea. I think I'm going to go to all 50 states and just see what I can learn from this. And he said, oh, that's interesting. You know, you ought to call Romney's advanced campaign planning team. They might help you with this. And I said, okay, I'll call them. And it turns out they're really good at, you know, day in, day out for 245 days. And it was every day, 7:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, just sort of lining up the most amazing meetings, which gave me a chance when I tried to write a book to, instead of drawing on a few things that were interesting, I had just a lot of really great things to talk about.
And we should also point out that this trip was all out of your own pocket. No one's paying you. You have no political agenda. You have no skin in the game, right?
Well, the skin I have is the fact. I mean, this is, if I leave you with any point, I want to leave you with this. When I started connecting these dots of machine intelligence racing ahead, eliminating all sorts of routine jobs, changing the requirements for what is needed, kids being pushed to excel, and teachers being held accountable to standards that reinforce a very narrow set of skills that actually are becoming increasingly irrelevant, that's not just a small thing. And I started to say to friends, this is 8, 9, 10 years ago, I'd say to them, and I was sort of phasing out of venture capital at the time, kind of trying to figure out what I'd do with my life at that point. I started to say, if we don't get this right, I'm not convinced that our democracy will stand. I think there's every chance civil society could collapse. And 8 years ago, you could just see, I go to a cocktail party and I'd be like the only guy in a 10-foot radius. I mean, nobody wanted to come near me. And I knew they were kind of whispering that retirement wasn't agreeing with me, or Ted's kind of lost it or whatever. And I've said that same thing in the last 100 talks I've given, and nobody has said, you're wrong. And I look at this, and so skin in the game, I think I have a ton of skin in the game. I mean, my dad dropped out of high school to enlist in the Navy as a 17-year-old in World War II, was in 6 straight Pacific Rim and combat thing. People died all around him. He was discharged early with a nervous breakdown. My mom moved from Kansas to work as a secretary for the Navy. I mean, this country is a country that will respond to big challenges. And to me, the biggest challenge is how do we elevate the outcomes for all of our kids with the kind of education they deserve? And I think if we don't, I think that as bad as things are today, there's some chance we'll say that was an early tremor to the earthquake and not just a temporary trough that we'll get through.
So in order to improve education, I know that on your trip you came across so many extraordinary examples of teachers and classrooms doing wonderful and innovative things. But as a common goal, our education system is designed to teach children to do well on standardized tests and then to get into college. It doesn't sound that bad, but you say it is.
I say it is, yeah. And, what you find over and over, the kids aren't that interested. Many are really bored. There are a lot of kids that could do so much better. That's the first point. The second is, if you look at, I do this sometimes in workshops, where I put up the entire list of what you do from grades 7 through 12 and ask people how much of it they use as adults. It's actually remarkably little. I call the standardized curriculum a decade late and $1 trillion short. And the third thing is, it's like when kids are being told over and over again, outcompete your classmates, do well to pass some state mandated test, I can get back to those in a second, climb up the ranks of getting into a slightly more selective college, I think you're hollowing out their sense of purpose. And so that worries me deeply. I think it should worry all of us. And then what I write about, what I celebrate, is when you visit places where they have the courage to go kind of against the grain, where they trust the teachers, where the teachers do what they entered the profession to do, which is to engage and inspire kids, which teachers do an awesome job of. And when kids have a voice in what they want to do, and they're working on things where they create or produce something that they're proud of, where they can explain how it makes their world better, it's just, those aren't small differences. We play such small ball where we worry about 0.4% swings on NAEP test or something. And these are differences in life outcomes. These are values that are formed by our kids. These are opening up lots of doors for them instead of channeling them down a very narrow path. And so, and you saw it, I saw it today. I mean, I had a great day here, but in Philadelphia, nobody in Philadelphia has to travel to Finland to see great examples of education. You've got these remarkable things that are going on here. And the question is, how do we, if we felt, as we did in World War II, that the future of the free world depends on getting education right, and I'm telling you, it does, then what would it look like if we had an all-hands effort to get schools in Philadelphia to be delivering the best of all outcomes for their kids? And I think you can do that. I think it can be done.
So what life skills will kids need in 10 years? What should we be teaching them?
Well, it's a bad time to be mediocre at a lot of things. So you think about it. I mean, you got to be better than what could be done in an automated way. You've got to be resourceful. But the main thing is, it's like when people talk about, I can't take credit for it, but one of my friends says, asking a kid what career you're interested in makes no sense when you know careers are coming and going. But asking a kid what problems you want to solve, how do you want to make your world better? That's a great discussion. And I find that when I talk to kids. I'll give I don't know how many students we've got, but these kids, they're great. Like a lot of people will rag on, the millennials and the late, what do we do with them? We put them in schools that are largely around worksheets, and we give them smartphones with a bunch of apps that have been designed to be addictive. And we wonder why there aren't some issues. I mean, there are clearly some issues. But you let these kids start to work on something they care about. I mean, I met so many kids today that you just say, man, our country will be in the best of all places as these kids step forward. And I just feel like if we put in place the conditions to let kids work on those types of challenges, supported by teachers we trust, and we should trust, who we pay well enough, which we don't pay well enough, and let them engage and inspire those kids, we could be heading into this glorious period for our country.
And that is the opposite of the skills that are required to do well on standardized tests, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole gradation of tests, right? And I'm not anti-test everywhere, so I want to make that clear. But if you've ever got like 2 hours to just kill some time and say, this might be interesting, go look at some of the sample questions. So if you look at a test, the international test, PISA, they're actually kind of interesting questions. You look at it, you say, that's interesting. I mean, I'd like to think about it. It kind of gets at, do you really know how to think? Then you step back, like you look at the SAT. Most of those things you can dictate in your smartphone and get the answer instantly. And they're not very interesting. But if you really want to be shocked, look at the sample questions on the state mandated test. And they are the bottom of the education barrel. And there's a reason for it. The states have almost no budget. They can't fund really good tests. Nobody can figure out how to grade. We always say we're going to test creative problem solving or critical thinking, but nobody can grade it, right? And so they end up with these tests. And I go and I look at the sample question. I just say, I I got a good math background, and most of the math questions strike me as not even well posed.
Well, we were talking earlier that 15% of adults actually use algebra, yet it's a requirement for getting a high school diploma.
Yeah. I mean, you think about that in America. If you today don't have a high school degree, it's probably game over unless there's something really, really odd and unusual going on. So no high school degree, likelihood of homelessness or in jail for whatever kid has that happen to them. And then you say, we're going to block a kid from a high school degree because they can't solve simultaneous equations. So just a quick question here. Who solved a simultaneous equation in the last month? I'm not seeing too many hands. And I say when I meet with legislators, this is criminal. I mean, you can't do this to kids. You know, it's one thing to say we want kids to leave high school financially literate. I mean, I'm in favor of standards. I'm in favor of saying kids have to be good at things that matter. And being financially literate strikes me as something that matters to any adult in America. But setting up a function, I mean, you know, I back all these tech companies in my prior life. They're not doing the math that's taught in 7th through 12th grades. And so you just say, you know, why? Why would we do that? And so, you know, I actually am, you know, pushing my book, and we're trying to take this to the next level. But to say to any legislators here, you know, even if you were here, I'd just say it to you. I know you don't wake up trying to ruin kids' lives and drive teachers out of the profession. I know that's not what you say when you get up in the morning, but that's what your policies are doing. And if you think these tests are so important, take them and publish your own scores. You know, because you hold teachers, you know, these people, and they don't, many times they don't even understand. I mean, these teachers, I don't know, I can't say this for sure in Pennsylvania, but most places, these accountability tests, teachers get no feedback on them. There's nothing about them that help them improve their profession or do a better job with their kid. The kids have, for the state mandated things, in a lot of cases, no real incentive to do better. I mean, nobody would, in an adult world, nobody would ever use that as an accountability approach. And yet we just jam it down the throats of our schools.
We were talking earlier that it's all about gaming the system, the way our current education system is framed. If the goal is to do well on these tests and get into college, then it's all about gaming the system and trying to figure out not how to think out a problem, but just to try to get it done and do it as quickly as you can without asking questions or really thinking that hard.
Yeah, we have it in the film. We have this short interview with an SAT test tutor. And back to these tests, I mean, you know, they'll say, you know, that it doesn't reflect, you know, income, but even the Wall Street Journal calls it the student affluence test. And the tutor said, you know, the kids that are the most challenging are the really creative kids, because he's got to teach them don't think about the question, you know, like, you know, think narrowly, think formulaically. The other piece of advice, think of this. I mean, think of this message. Tutors will tell, I mean, if a good tutor, which by the way can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, will tell a kid this: if it's a hard problem you can't figure out quickly, skip it. I mean, you know, like we do all this, you know, how many people say, oh, it's so important, we build grit into our kids, and then we say, if it's hard and you're gonna have to figure it out, skip it. I mean, you're like, is that the message we want to give to kids? Skip it? And I was like, no, you know, but that's just it. And so it rewards, I really want to make sure we understand this. It rewards kids who have drilled on the same narrow thing over and over and over again, so they do it in 15 to 30 seconds. And that's not at all related. I know, you know, that has nothing to do with being really great at math or physics or anything STEM related. That's an irrelevant skill, but it really reflects, I think, largely how hard the parents push the kid. Can they afford the tutor? You know, the going rate, I could get, you can tell you're going in this, but anybody want to guess in Upper East Side Manhattan what the going rate is for an SAT test tutor who's great? Per hour. 500. Somebody, oh, that's good, $500 an hour. $500 an hour. I mean, that's wow. Think of all the good you could do for kids that need it. And that's we vote with our feet. That's where we put the money.
So it encourages the divide socioeconomically of who does well and who doesn't, who has access to good education, right?
Yep.
So what should we be doing? I know on your trip you observed schools that are encouraging students to be innovative and to be entrepreneurial. Can you give us a couple examples?
So a lot of schools represented. I promise you, if we walked around any of the schools that are here tonight, any school, we'll find some great things going on. And one of the things I've observed is if you're the only teacher doing really innovative things in a school, it's tough, and it's a lot easier for 10 teachers to be innovative in a school than one. It's a lot easier for 10 schools in the community to be innovative than one. And so to the extent anybody, like a lot of times, and one of the biggest impediments, there were a bunch of people who were parents, but parents can be one of the biggest impediments. It's like, they just are so risk averse and so concerned about their kid, and it's not how it was when I went to school, and you didn't make it clear to my kid what it has to, what they have to do to get an A or who knows what. And I just say, back off, back off. And what we try to do, I've got films and books and things, and we've got this thing called an innovation playlist, but we really try to encourage, modest shifts in the thinking, just some small changes you introduce, like giving kids uninterrupted blocks of time to think of really thought-provoking questions. Simple little small steps that start to shift what's going on. But the more that when teachers try that and they're encouraged. The book, I write about all these really amazing places. And there were two things that were in common. In every single one, the teacher wasn't copying somebody else. They were doing something they felt was the right thing for their students. And in every single one, the teacher said somebody had their back. And so I think there's a really important thing about, and it's one of the encouraging things, is that school is very local. A school can do a lot if they put their mind to it. And I think there's really an opportunity if we can bring school, with our film, this film Most Likely to Succeed. We premiered at Sundance. We did a bunch of film festivals. And I turned down Netflix. And people said to me, "You're crazy. What a stupid decision. Why would you turn down Netflix?" And it was the best decision I ever made, because we did 7,500 schools have screened the film, brought their entire, parent-teacher community together to watch it, and then have a thoughtful discussion about what's the right thing to do for our kids. We don't say, do what you saw in the film. We say, do what you think works for your kids. And just as I don't think kids learn anything meaningful alone on a laptop just watching something, I didn't think people would really start to change schools. And so if they just watched a film alone on a laptop. And so we've really done that model aggressively. And but here, here's another thing that worries me. I've worried a lot. Is that in January, 3 people came to see me from China. Now, I don't get up every morning. I get up every morning saying it's really important for our country to get education right. I never wake up saying it's really important for China to get education right. I don't have anything particularly negative, but I worry about them. And they sent 3 people to tell me that they had pirated the film. I was glad to hear that. But they're doing these online screenings of the film and getting 10 to 25,000 people at a time to watch this film, because they are dead serious about reinventing school in China. Now, will they? I don't know. But other countries are not sitting around. And I think the United States, I think we've really got to think about this more with the mindset of what we had in 1941 when we thought the free world was at risk, than to think about this as, God, it'd be nice to. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if my kid actually came home from school and was excited and could tell me what they studied, and I could actually explain why it's relevant.
You had a lot of examples of, and diverse ones, of classrooms that were really working, where kids were engaged and they were learning deeply. But there were some commonalities too, and 4 shared elements that you call PEAK. Can you talk about what that acronym stands for, what it means?
Yeah. First, you would not believe the stack of papers I had trying to come up with an acronym. It's very hard. So working from bottom up, knowledge, I always ask schools, show me the evidence that kids have actually really learned something here. Not to pick on any schools, but I would be willing to bet there are a lot of schools in Philadelphia that people think are great schools where the kids aren't learning anything. And the example we have in our book, in the film, is Lawrenceville Academy, so in Princeton, New Jersey, where they just went back and retested kids in September on a stripped-down version of their final. They took out all the low-level stuff, and they just asked kids on the high-level concepts they were sure every kid had mastered. 2 years, lots of kids, several different classes at a private boarding school that cost $70,000 a year. And the average grade went from B+ to F, and not one kid retained all the concepts the faculty thought every kid had mastered. So, if that's at Lawrenceville, and I asked school after school to convince me the kids actually retaining what they've studied, And so far, nobody has. I think it's fair game to say there's not a lot of deep knowledge going on. But in the schools I write about, because the kids were creating, producing, applying, because they had kids teaching other kids, I saw a lot of that today, some of the places I visited. We all know you never learn anything as well as when you teach. You never really learned it unless you can apply and make something of it. So difference there. Agency. Every 4-year-old has tons of agency in their life. They can pick a million different directions to go. Not entirely coincidentally, 4-year-olds learn at warp speed. By the time a kid gets to high school, easily 100%, usually 125% of healthy waking hours are pre-programmed for them week in and week out. And then you contrast that. Apple Computer recently said, we've decided any employee that needs a manager is no longer employable. If you can't function with agency, you will be replaced by machine intelligence. So should agency be going down as kids move up in the school system, or should it be going up? Big difference. Essential competencies. The places I go that I really am blown away by are really clear on what they want their kids to get good at. And it is not test prep, and it is not, filling in bubbles. And it's not, each school sort of defines it in their own way and embraces it, but it always gets back to sort of communication, collaboration, creative problem solving, critical analysis, citizenship. There are a set of things, and that's sort of their North Star. And that's a really great thing to look for. Can a school tell you, we've got these years to work with our kids, what do we want them to get really good at? And kind of if it doesn't lead to better performance on the state mandated test or college application, those will endure. And the final thing, which is I think the most important, is the purpose. And when I go to these places and I talk to kids and say, what are you doing? They always, the places that I admire, the places I write about, the places I think give us real sense of what the possibilities are, the kids always start with, well, I'm intellectually curious about something, and therefore I'm reading this. Or I'm trying to design such and such, so I'm doing this. Or we've decided to start this organization. So, they're doing it for a reason. And a lot of people, there's this sort of this general angst, I think, particularly among rich families, that our kids are under too much stress. They don't ever, this sounds snarky, they have no idea.
Go ahead, Ted.
They have no idea what the real stress is of a lot of kids in America today. I mean, like a kid whose parents are leaning on him because if you don't get into Penn, your life is over. That stress doesn't come close to what the stress of a lot of kids. But the point I make in the book is there's all sorts of different kinds of stress, and to say that the answer is no homework, I think is really foolish. I think what you want is a kid that's we had two scenes we didn't get into our film where they interview kids during the day at the school, and they say, do you like the school? They love it. And they say, what's your favorite thing about the school? And the kids say, we have no homework. And the film team texts me, they're alarmed. You have me filming at a school with no homework? This makes no sense. And they went home with them at night, and at 10:30 at night, the kids are still working. And they ask them, 11 hours ago you said you have no homework, and it's 10:30 and you're still going strong. And they look at the camera and they say, well, this isn't homework, we want to do this. And you realize these kids want to do things. They want to make a difference. They have incredible determination to make their world better. And it's why would we bottle that off to the side and think we can close all the missed opportunities out with a graduation speech where we say, now that you spent years drilling on for standardized tests, prepping for SATs, checking the box off on a lot of extracurriculars, you don't believe in just to please a college admissions officer. You've done all that, but now go out and make the world better. It's no, that's not how the world works. We're shaping the values of these kids for 12, 16 years. The priorities we place on them, the environment we put them in, determines who they are as people.
So I'd like to get to some of the real-world examples that you have because I think they really help people figure out how to go about doing this. I love the example of the former police officer who's now a kindergarten teacher who is teaching his kids robotics in kindergarten.
Yeah. So this I'll back up a little. So I'm in the middle of this trip, and I land in, and my wife, who's here somewhere, she's with me on this particular part, which thank goodness. So we landed in Indianapolis and get to the hotel around 12:30 in the morning, and it's I'm exhausted. And I look at my calendar, and it's got something the next day in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I think Fort Wayne is a suburb of Indianapolis. Little do I know. It's 3 hours away. So I get another long drive. So I get to Indianapolis, and we have this big community event. And at the very end, This guy stands up to ask a question, and he could easily be an offensive lineman for the Indianapolis Colts. He's like 6'3", 300 pounds, and I'm like bracing myself because he's got that look like he's going to say, I think what you just said is a load of malarkey. But it wasn't. He's like this was like, wow. 10 years in the police force, coached girls softball, got concerned that the girls at that age, these were high school kids, were not really learning. At night, gets his teaching credential, finally gets his kindergarten class, goes to his principal and says, I just read what the state of Indiana tells me I need to do. Do the people that write these ever spend time with 5- and 6-year-olds? You know, they're telling me I need to have 90-minute uninterrupted blocks of reading time. Show me a 5-year-old that wants to read for 90 minutes straight when you tell them they have to. So he says to his principal, and you can't make this stuff up. This is what you find when you travel and talk to these people. He says, I want my kids, I think they'd get excited about designing robots and doing 3D printing. And so the principal says, Jared, we don't have any equipment in the school. Do you have equipment already? He said, no, I have no equipment. He said, how are you going to get equipment? He says, you know, I think if I take a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds to businesses in Fort Wayne and they knock on the door and say, would you give us $100 for some robotics kits, that a lot of those businesses will step up. They're not going to turn down 5- and 6-year-olds. Okay, that might work. He says, Jared, how much do you know about robotics and 3D printing? He says, you know, I don't know anything. But, you know, these kids will figure it out, and I'm willing to stand in front of my class and say, I don't know this, you don't know this, we're going to learn together. And boom, boom, boom. At the end of the year, they do this big exhibition. Some of the things were remarkable. Some were pretty good. Some weren't very good. But all those kids were so excited. On the state-mandated test, they did better than peers. And I said, Jared, how do you explain it? He said, you know, like teaching like 10 minus 4 equals 6 isn't that hard when you put 10 blocks at the end of the room and say, code your robot to go get 4 of them. And you realize these kids, if they've got a reason to be in school and they're really motivated and engaged and can't wait for school to start, and they learn.
Is that the same school where the students were also the IT support teams for all of the technology that came in?
That was in West Virginia. That was a different one. So it's made the West Virginia, because it's so poor, they get tractor trailer trucks of technology dumped into schools. And you know, just to be clear, you know, I think there's a lot of wasted money on ed tech. I see some great schools that have no technology. I see some terrible schools with lots of technology. And so that formula of just dumping iPads on every kid is a bad idea. That's not a thoughtful step forward. But they have them. And the teachers don't want to deal with it. And so this principal has the idea of making 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders the IT support desk. And like I say, well, that's kind of cool. So I start interviewing these kids. And I'm expecting they're like able to figure out how to get Wi-Fi access or make the smartboard work. And they can do all that. But they're like going beyond. They're saying like, well, you know, our classmates, sometimes they have problems with math. And so we really have done a careful analysis of all the math apps. And we're able to say, oh, I think you'd be really good with motion, you know, like motion math. I'm saying like, these are like 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. But the amount of pride in these kids of stepping up and making their schoolwork better, helping classmates. And I sort of say in my book, and this is obviously not the only point of education. I want to make that emphatically clear. This is not the only point of education. But if a 10-year-old in a poor area of West Virginia is in a position to get a job as the IT support person for a bank and make 3 or 4 times the minimum wage, and that's better than most college graduates, that tells us something interesting about education.
And it just goes back to, if you want to engage the kids, you have to give them that agency and that purpose, right?
Yeah. And there's real purpose with that.
The other element that I love that you talked about in your book is the importance of the connection between school and community and collaboration. And so you talked about how there's a school, and I don't remember where it is, but they collaborated with a lot of businesses in the community. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, there are a couple I mentioned, but this is a great example. So Albuquerque, New Mexico it's one of the poorest cities in America. And so there were these kids in a place called Siembra Leadership Academy. And so I want you to visualize. So 15-year-old, principally Hispanic kids, broken homes, terrible home situations for the most part. They've all been either thrown out or dropped out of their normal high school. The reason, in many cases, they weren't going to be able to pass the math that they never use. And they get to a different school that's got one person part-time as a liaison to organizations in Albuquerque. And they just go and say, do you have any problems that high school kids could help you with? And when I say that sometimes to businesses, they think, you really think our business has anything that a high school kid could help with? I mean, we could make work, but we don't have any real projects. Well, the Albuquerque Soul is the semi-pro soccer team there, and it's run by people my age. And so they say to this liaison person, they say, well, you know, we got this one thing. We know there's this stuff out there called social media. We think it might help us grow our fan base, maybe reach younger fans. Do you have any 15-year-old Hispanic kids that would be interested in designing and implementing social media campaigns for us? Well, you know, like you think about that difference, right? So the kids are on it like a dog on a pork chop. They know what works. The Soul, Albuquerque Soul, can look at 10 different proposals and say, we love these 4. Here's $250 per each. Test it. Tell us what works. The other 6, glom onto these teams and help make it better. And I write about in the book the fact that the going rate on Upwork, if you're a social media expert with a reference account, it's like $20, $30 an hour. Now, again, I'm an English major. I talk all the time about how unbelievably important English was in my background. I'm really not saying that careers should be the only focus of school. Promise, it's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying if you can cover that part-time and kids can escape poverty, because these Albuquerque kids, without that, dropped out from high school, no support from family, homeless or in jail, or probably both. You know, now they're escaping poverty and moving forward with a really fulfilling, interesting career path. And the point I make in the book is, out of 200 schools, that's the only one that did that. And if we rely on committees and bureaucracies to dictate education, in 2040, we'll get some app on MySpace. You know, it's like they'll never be dynamic enough to keep pace. And so.
And you do talk a lot in your book about instilling in kids the joy of learning. And I loved what you were telling me today about CASA in the Bronx and how they're teaching kids through rap.
Yeah, this is a school in the poorest area of New York. Kids they're not cherry, but these are just kids coming to their local school, but they get this principal who says, we're going to make a focal point of this school rap music. And most curmudgeonly adults would say, God, you're not, no academic rigor, no this, no that, you're just, what a joke. And you look at but I'm there at the school. These kids are running around and they're doing all sorts of things. And the role of the teachers is to take what most of these kids find incredibly interesting and broaden it. So rap leads to language arts, leads to poets, leads to, authors. And these kids are getting really good at reading. And the beats, suddenly has a math behind it. And the percussion, has a physics behind it. And they're making good on that. And the reason I heard about this school is that everybody was baffled that a school that spent no time teaching to the test outperformed almost every other public middle school in New York. And these kids their test scores jumped up. But the point of the book really is, because I profile all these different things, is that they're not on the surface at all alike. Rap music versus IT support desk versus kids in making documentaries versus, all these things are very different superficially, but underneath they're learning the essential skills. They have, it's all those principles. The knowledge is deep and retained. They're acting with agency. They have voice in what they're doing. They're learning all the critical competencies, and they just know it matters.
So you say the purpose of U.S. education today is to rank human potential, not develop it. So all of these ideas and these innovations are wonderful, but let's face it, today's system, our culture is obsessed with assessments, with measuring how well students are doing, and thus also measuring teachers. So how can we hold teachers accountable and also measure students, but in a meaningful and productive way?
Yeah. So I'll talk about 2 examples. New Hampshire, and then a higher ed institution. So New Hampshire from 2009 to 2016 completely rethought education. They trusted teachers to lead the way with a more thoughtful set of assessments. They moved away from seat time and numbers to competency and performance-based assessments. And the difference is night and day. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in New Hampshire. The best questions I've gotten ever were from public school, high school kids in New Hampshire. I mean, I said, what are you doing here that's different? I mean, did you drill on test, questions for me or something? And you just could see, it was like, it can be done at scale, but what they did was and I talk about Tom McManus in my book, who did something very similar at Mid-Pacific, where instead of saying it's numbers, get representative samples of work that show for, let's just say, ninth grade language arts, what are adequate, proficient, and excellent portfolio of writing samples that show a kid's really getting good at communication skills. And then trust teachers to map that, subject to checks and balances. So, boom. So that's what they're doing at the high school. College level. This story I love, so I'm going to tell you this. They set me up for a day. I went to, I'd never been there before, the U.S. Naval Academy. And I said, this will be interesting, but I also said this will be, what could be more traditional? I'm going to just think this is same old on steroids. And I end up writing, and shame on me for a stereotype, and I end up writing that the Naval Academy could easily be the most innovative higher ed institution in the world. Where did it start? So Ted Carter is walking me through this. He said, we didn't think we were getting the best possible leadership for the Navy with our admissions process. They were looking at SATs, grade point average, Eagle Scout, letters from congressmen or senators, right? He said that wasn't telling us what we needed to do. So what they do, they said we put priority. The most important thing is provide us with evidence that you're the kind of person that just will never quit to accomplish something that's an important contribution to your world. And when I say that, right, is that not who you want your kid to be? Is that not who you want as a neighbor? Somebody that just won't give up until they've effected positive change in their world? And can you find that in students' applications? Absolutely. But then they got rid of all their introductory lecture courses. It's all project-based and Socratic seminar. And they said, surprise, surprise, diversity went way up. Number of women, way up. They bragged about the fact that in their 13-week crazily intensive boot camp, not one woman dropped out. And the thing that's so interesting about the Naval Academy, most colleges shake hands at graduation day and hope you'll keep donating for the rest of your life. And the Naval Academy, that's the Navy. They have more at stake in their graduates than anyone else in the world. And I just say, imagine if high schools were like New Hampshire, like Mid-Pac, authentic examples of work. And college admission says, we care about those. We want to see examples of real work.
So speaking of college admissions, can you also talk about Scott Looney in Cleveland, who's working on changing the high school transcript and replacing it with the mastery transcript?
Yeah, there are a couple examples. There's at the high school level, there's a group that's now hundreds of schools trying to change it from numbers to real examples of work. And they're making real progress. And then there's at the college level, the Coalition for Access. And I'm involved with them, and they're trying to rethink college applications. I wish I could say they are charging ahead at warp speed. Fasten your seatbelt. College admissions will change entirely next year. We've got to bet a lot on the turtle here and not the hare. But they are starting to look more at digital portfolios of work. And what I found, I spent my career in venture capital, and I got just increasing, it sort of leads to what set me on this journey, is that I got increasingly skeptical with the academic superstars. I just found that they were not geared up for a world that's dynamic and fast changing and innovative. Not all of them, but that wasn't the top of the hill. And I started to ask anybody that wanted to meet with me, for a job or back a company or whatever. I just say, could you send me 3 writing samples that will tell me what I should know about you? That was it. So I gave the keynote last August to 250 college admissions officers, and I say, look at how I did in venture. Worked out pretty darn well. Don't tell me you don't have enough time. Ask kids to show you what they've produced or created or made that will tell you they're the kind of kid you should accept. And don't tell me that we should ruin lots of K through 12 kids' lives because you can't go from 7 minutes to 9 minutes in application. That's just not okay.
But the fact is, we have been doing it this way for a really long time. So how optimistic are you that real change will happen in our classrooms and that we can get our culture to truly rethink the role of school?
Well, if it were definitely happening, I wouldn't be doing what I do to myself. If it were definitely not happening, I wouldn't be doing it. It could happen. And I see these things that are really encouraging, but I think one of the opportunities here, so I'm going to, I know this is in your face, but I write about not Philadelphia, but Pittsburgh in the book. And so bear with me. But,
Forgive him, folks.
Pittsburgh has, for 10 years now, it started small, but it's now taken on a huge life. And they do this thing called Remake Learning Days. And they spend a week and a half, and they just celebrate a reimagined view of what kids could do in school. And they reach everyone. They have a big media campaign behind it. They have kids and teachers doing pop-ups in libraries and street corners. And people just get really excited. And suddenly when you give teachers in your schools kind of the permission and the encouragement and kind of let them know the community has your back, there's so much pent-up innovation in our teaching force. And so to the extent places like Pittsburgh, places like Philadelphia can start to build on the really great things that are going on and show that, in 5 years, I see districts all across the country that in 2-3 years, totally different. You can change it that quickly.
So we have this incredible group of people here in Philadelphia creating the Revolution School. What is your advice to them?
Well, I mean, there's not a lot of advice I can give them because they know what they're doing. And they will start from scratch and they will do something remarkable. I would give advice to people thinking about it, which is I actually think the very best year will be the first year. Because there's going to be this co-invention thing with the first class of students. Because here's one of the things that I think is interesting, and it builds on a question you said before, is what's the most important thing kids could get good at in a world that's changing at warp speed, where careers come and go? And I think it's that ability to dive into ambiguity with confidence and with the skills that know you're going to make the best of it. And so often in school, we do everything to take the ambiguity out. Parents say, you didn't make it clear enough what you have to do to get an A. Parents will, people think lots of AP courses, isn't that great? There is zero ambiguity in an AP course. It's just from day 1 to day 180, everything's prescribed. You want kids to be able to be comfortable. Yeah, I don't know entirely. I'm not going to make a bad jump. I'm going to make an informed, smart decision about where I head. But that's what I saw with people that are changing the world, is that they say there's a lot not figured out about this, but I sure as heck think I can figure it out as I go. And so I think the early commits. But the other thing, and I think I'd give them credit for convening this, is the opportunity there is not just to deliver amazing education to 200, 300, 400 kids, is to help catalyze change across a great big metropolitan area. And I see a lot of synergy here. And places I'm visiting, you have the basis here to just build this sort of sense of aspirational challenge that adults in Philadelphia are willing to take on and just say, dang it, we're going to do this. We are going to make sure no kid's getting a bad deal in their education.
And for the teachers in the room at existing schools, I love that you say it doesn't have to be top down, that they can make small but powerful changes in their own classrooms. And one of my favorite things that you said is, instead of being the guide, or that you should be the guide on the side and not the sage on the stage. Can you talk about what that means?
Well, here's what I do say. I think it's a mistake. If I were a principal, which is a thankless job, and if you're dealing with principals in your life, thank them. The last thing I do is to say to teachers, everybody has to. And there are some teachers that teach traditionally that do a great job. I think it's far more powerful to say, those who are interested in doing something somewhat different, I've got your back, go for it. And because, there are teachers out there that will sprint. And if they're encouraged and cheered, they will sprint for, it's like the dedication of teachers is just beyond words. And when the sprinters are sprinting and they're not getting tackled, they're not getting piled on, they're not being called, put in the penalty box, there are others that will run. And when the runners are running and they're being supported, there are others that will jog. And I don't think it's the end of the world for kids to have a diverse type of teaching experiences. And so I think we have far more leverage where we can take the stuff that's working and celebrate and encourage that to be, more ubiquitous. And just not obsess about making everybody do things the same way. And so, because I think every school will have, the percentages vary, but basically I visited so many of these schools that maybe a quarter are the sprinters, and maybe a quarter are I'm just never changing, go away. And they're the whole set in the middle that if they see it's interesting, they want, all these teachers desperately want great things for their kids. The amount, I'll tell one other story. just to reinforce this with the teachers. So I just show up to these things and I say, tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And so I went to one event a few months ago and they said, well, can you give a talk in the morning? I said, sure. And then they said, we have some breakout sessions for you. I said, sure, no problem. I said, when are they? And they said, well, we got one at 11, one at 12:30, one at 2, and one at 3:30. And what's going through my mind is, how could they do this to me? I mean, that is abusive. You know, I have to give a talk, and then I've got to do 4 back-to-back sessions. And then I just said, wait a minute. That's every day of a teacher's life. And I'm teaching something I'm passionate about to people that are passionate about it. I'm not trying to teach high school kids how to balance chemical equations. You know, like how hard must it be 5 periods a day to take 35 kids in a class and get them excited about valence electrons, right? I mean, that's not easy. And so, you know, supporting them and just letting them kind of run with stuff. They all entered this profession not for the money, and yet we take advantage of that and don't pay them enough. But they entered the profession because they care deeply about kids. And I think we should trust them and respect them and let them do what they entered the profession to do.
I could not agree with you more. One more question from me before we get to our audience questions, and that is, what is your advice for parents? We talked a lot earlier today about how parents need to let go. It's okay.
Yeah, I've got a 20 and a 22-year-old, so I've been through this. And you've just heard me talk for however long. And even for me, you have to kind of gulp when you say to your kids, blow it off. But I sort of felt like that was the right thing to do. I mean, I didn't say blow it off, but I said, these are the trade-offs. You can do everything high school tells you to do, have slightly better numbers, and maybe have a slightly better chance of getting into a more selective college. Or you can run fast with something you really care about. And I'm not here to make that decision for you. I'm going to trust you to decide what you think is the right thing to do. And I never looked at my kids' high school report cards. We never had any, that was just like their business. And that's a scary thing. And I appreciate how scary it is. But I feel like if you try to make them do something, it almost always backfires. And you can pile on and just push and push and push. But honestly, when I interview a lot of kids in colleges, I mean, you may think everything's great because you got your kid into that slightly more selective college because you wailed on them day in and day out. There's a lot of issues. I mean, the American Mental Health Association, it's like 83% of college kids report feeling overwhelmed. 45% report feeling hopeless from time to time. 35% report being depressed to the point of not being able to get out of bed. A third are on steady Adderall diets. And, so I say, like, is that what we want?
And you said the question that parents might want to pose to their children is not which college, but why college?
Why
right?
college? And why not a gap year? Or why not? I feel like I write about it, and it's not my book, but a great book. Any parents with young kids, pick up and read Parenting with Dignity. It's by a guy named Mac Bledsoe. His son was an NFL quarterback. And like a lot of great books, you can describe it simply. He says, when you have a newborn, you make 100% of their decisions. Your main responsibility as a parent is by the time they're 18, they make 100% of their decisions. Not 100% of their low-level decisions, not 70% of their high-level decisions, 100% of their decisions. 100%. That is when you've succeeded as a parent. And I say, what if we thought about that for schools? What if we celebrated, if we got kids focused on a mission in life and they could really learn how to learn, and they were off and running, what if we said that's success? Instead of, one of the things a lot of people quote back to me from the book is, I won't have this exactly the way I wrote it, but I said, education should prepare kids for life. We have it all wrong. We prepare kids' lives for education. We organize kids' lives for the needs of school. And it just shouldn't be the way. And so, it makes people nervous when you think of like somebody saying, there are ways for kids to move forward in a great, compelling way that doesn't require more costly formal education. But I think it would take a lot of the pressure off a high school kid if instead of saying, which happens a lot. I mean, jumping to California, the first community screening I did of Most Likely to Succeed was in a high school in Palo Alto. They said, we think we'll have a good-sized turnout. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, their auditorium holds 850. We think we've got a chance of filling it. 2 days before, they said, we're now streaming into the gym. And they had 1,500 people there. Why did they have 1,500 people to see one movie? That school year, they had 5 student suicides in one school. When did the suicides happen? SATs came back, early decision letters come back, final acceptance letters came back. These were kids that if you met them, you'd think were great, happy, normal kids. But what happens? Parents will say, this is the Faustian bargain, right? Your kid, like the opening of our film, 4th grade kid bored with the math in school, doesn't understand the point. Parents start, it's easy, right? You got to do it. It's important. Get good grades. If you don't get good grades, you won't get in the right good college. If you don't get in the right college, you won't have a great life. Get good grades, good college, great life. Good grades, great college, great life. Kids work like crazy. Schools are so much harder to get into that the great college they hold out there, they don't get into. And the college they say, you have to get into this. God forbid you end up going here. Well, that's the one they get into. And they feel terrible. They feel like they failed. And it's like, why are we doing that when the thing that matters far more if a kid does go to college is what they want to get out of it instead of how hard it was to get into. And I think we're sending these kids a really wrong message in a way that for them is very public and visible, right? I mean, no kid's SAT scores are private. No kid's college results are private. It's broadcast. It might as well be on, on the school's website. And I just say, like, that's just not, purpose. We're shaping their values. We should care about how they in their own way are going to make their world better.
Well, Ted, I thank you for your inspiring vision and your curiosity and your courage to call for change. I want to ask the audience members if they have any questions. And if you do, I encourage you to go to the mic in the middle so we can all hear you.
How you doing?
Great.
My name's Warren Austin. My background is basically in electrical engineering and theology. It's kind of like AI versus God. Okay. My question is this. Now, as a child, we come into this world with a basic instinct of survival and a need to, the basics, food, clothing, and shelter. But like you were saying, it seems like our education society is biased towards education first, survival second. But it should be, how do we survive? We survive by becoming educated, okay? Because we need the basics, food, clothing, and shelter. So what do you think we need to do, to educate our kids to understand just that basic need that, if we want better food, clothing, and shelter, we have to get a better job. That's what it all computes to. That's what it all comes down to. And I think we're overlooking that.
Yeah. Well, your question raises so many great points. I mean, one of the things that I find heartbreaking is the number of kids that go to school every day hungry. And I feel like that there's a need for us collectively as adults to start stepping up to some really important issues. I mean, so, we just last year passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut for the richest Americans and corporations that are gushing cash. And we undercut the budgets for, it's like suddenly we say we don't have enough money for, food and health insurance for kids. I mean, like something's really wrong with those values. We say how important it is to increase our defense spending. Right? We spend more than the next 8 countries combined. We spend 3 times what China spends. It's like we have our budget priorities all wrong. So food, survival, I just don't, I'm sort of a, not a communist, I'm not a socialist. I think the free market has its place, but I sure as heck think that we owe every kid born into this country somewhat of a level playing field moving forward. And so I write about and talk about the fact that it's not okay that we spend the most to educate the kids that need the least and the least to educate the kids that need the most. It's not okay that kids go to school hungry. And what really bothers me is that instead of facing those hard issues, we wrap it all up in this thing we call the achievement gap, because that lets us put the blame on the students and the teachers. And we don't want to talk about the gap that matters, which is how much we spend to educate kids in a fair and balanced way. And the achievement we make on these, I really have to watch. I do tend to use the word BS a lot in my normal talk. So if I slip, I'm trying hard not to. But we define achievement on these meaningless tests that kids don't find at all. I say, in the last several years, I probably dealt with 10,000 students. And do you know how many of them are intrinsically motivated to do test prep? 0. But how many parents are motivated to make their kid do test prep? a fair number, and statistically far more, the richer the family, the more educated the family, the more they are on their kid to do test prep. And so the achievement gap is bogus in every way, shape, or form. And so, but I do feel like that these kids are incredibly resourceful. And I find these kids that when they figure out, I think we could have kids leverage passion. So back to CASA. I met this kid recently who's a singer. He wants to, his passion is singing. And he sort of pieced together this really entrepreneurial career where he does custom songs for things. People pay him money. He does these online concerts where people pay him a little bit of money to give him a shout out. And he won't ever be a great musician, but he's sort of taken his passion for music and figured out some basic entrepreneurial skills for because one of the great things about the connectivity we've got is that kids can really leverage their, a different example in my book is a young woman I interviewed in Vermont. So she's a senior. In a normal state, she wouldn't have ever graduated from high school. Loved art, was not going to pass her math. And in Vermont, they let her swap out algebra for something else that she thought was interesting. Well, what did she think was interesting? She said, could I do a self-directed course where I teach myself how to design websites? So think about that. So it suddenly gets her high school degree, but think about somebody who's really great at art who can design websites. I mean, that's a kid that's escaping poverty. That's a kid who's got a great, fulfilling career path forward. And so you look at those things, these aren't like small ball outcomes. These are kids that are destined for either homelessness or jail or destined for something really great. And I just think it's just a failure of imagination and courage on our part not to say to our schools, help launch kids into lives of purpose instead of meet some ridiculous target for test scores. And I think the other thing, I want to say one other thing about this because I really get torqued about this, is that the achievement gap, right? And by any slice, whether it's ethnicity or income, rich white does better than everybody else. Rich Asian does even better. But what do I find, right? What do I find when kids are given messy, ambiguous challenges? Everything changes, right? And so the really rich kids actually freeze, not all of them, but by and large, we give them something messy that requires them to stare down failure. They get really nervous about that, and they actually don't do that well on that. And a lot of these kids that we write off with these offensive terms like at risk or underachieving, give them a problem they care about, and these adults will tell me as though it's like a rainstorm blowing in. Oh my God, I had no idea they had it in them. And I said, what if we gave kids challenges in school they cared about? I mean, that's going to reflect the capability and the potential of the kid, not the push of the parent. And I guarantee you these kids, if Philadelphia just said, damn it all, we're going to make sure every kid has a fighting chance in life. And we're going to invest and we're going to call in businesses to help put in place, businesses are generous if we ask them. And if you said, we want businesses to adopt every public high school in Philadelphia and make sure these kids are getting great opportunities, they'll do it. It's just a matter of putting out, as I said before, America responds to big challenges. And I'd ask each of you, when's the last time anybody's asked you to do anything meaningful toward the goal of a big challenge? It doesn't happen anymore in our country. And I just say, why? Why not put a big challenge out there? Give every kid in our community a fighting chance in life with the kind of education that their teachers are desperate to deliver to them, that the kids will rise to.
Well, thank you, Ted, for your call to action, for your optimism, for your passion, and for being with us tonight. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I want to bring up Henry Fairfax, the head of school for the Revolution School, for a little surprise for you and for everyone else tonight, right? And before I pass the mic, I just wanted to thank the Revolution School once again for having all of us. You so generously are inviting the entire community to be part of your movement, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Nydia. And I want to join you in saying that was about as inspiring a conversation as I've heard. And Ted, I got to tell you something. I've been avoiding you all day.
Why doesn't he want to talk to me?
I've got an interesting story to share. And so the The Revolution Project was brought to my attention by Noel Kellick and Gina Moore, our benefactor, and they introduced the project to me with Most Likely to Succeed. At the same time, I was teaching my then 3-year-old, he's 5 now, how to ride a bike. You set up this wonderful example in that book, early in the book, Most Likely to Succeed. What if, he poses the question, we taught our kids how to ride a bike with the bicycle achievement test? I lived in Fairmount for the last 3 years, and I was riding around the neighborhood. There was a young man on his contraption, I'm going to call it that. It had 2 wheels, it had handlebars, but it had no pedals, had no brakes. My 3-year-old, Cassius, says, "Daddy, I want one of those." I said, "I'm not sure what that is, son, and I'm not going to buy it for you." So we go back home, and I pull out his bike. I said, "You're going to learn how to ride a bike on a bike." He didn't know what a derailleur was. And so the example that sets up in his book talks about all these terms that don't necessarily teach you how to actually ride a bike. And so that's not how I taught my son how to ride a bike. I was so inspired by it. I called Gina, I called Noel. I said, "I'm all on board for the Revolution Project. This is unbelievable." And so you inspired me. You know, absolutely that day, my son actually learned how to ride a bike. So just a really cool, just a really cool, really cool story I wanted to share with you. So that's why I was avoiding you all day. But as head of school, I have some business at hand, and that business is actually to congratulate some of the students who actually were able to win our raffle. And I'm going to read some names out, and I don't want to butcher these names. Virginia Morris. Dan Seidler. Karen Saylor. Beatrix, but there's no last name. Rosemary Farazi. Peggy Connolly. Ben Wren. Larry Amy. Lauren Rabbits. And Barbara Bassett. So if you can connect with us at the end, I will absolutely make sure that we own up to our promise. You guys, this has been an unbelievable night. I'm so much more inspired than I walked in today. I had an opportunity to meet, and our team had an opportunity to engage in what is a really, really important conversation. Ted, I can't tell you how much I appreciate, and our team appreciates how you've inspired all of us. And I think, you know, the moral of the story in my case is kids learn by doing. And so Revolution Project is talking and planning a lot of doing for students where they love learning and they're engaged and they can't wait to wake up and go to school every single day because that's what they want to do. And that's absolutely awesome. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate you for that inspiration. So thank you. And Nydia, we're going to try to do this again, and we're going to invite you to come back and facilitate because you're great. So our team, we're wearing some stickers that Jenna and I were actually talking about aren't sticking that well, but they're yellow circles, and they have our branding on it. But anyway, we're around if you guys want to engage in conversation, keep the conversation going. We're around. Please visit with us, talk with us. We'd love to share our work with you. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. What a great night.